Hello, my name is Alexandru and I am a Romanian-born seeker of truth, a lifetime student in the Gurdjieff groups all around the world. And I have authored quite a few books on the Gurdjieff teaching, including books describing in detail the practical internal exercises and the famous movements and sacred dances. This channel is about the Enneagram brought by Gurdjieff, to whom we will always be grateful for bringing such a tremendous teaching and sharing it with us. Among my books about the Enneagram, you can see here the cover of Process Coaching with the Enneagram and the cover of the Business Enneagram. I also highly recommend the books written by my friend Adrian Mirel Petrariu, especially his grand opus, The Mythology of the Energy. Among his books on the Enneagram, you can see here the cover of the Gurdjieff Enneagram Origins and the fabulous The Enneagram of Thought. Today we will start a new series that has to do with the Kundabuffer, one of Gurdjieff's main ideas, and the relationship between the human centers and the Kundabuffer. The Enneagram is an instrument to help us to achieve triadic perception and mentation. Whereas our ordinary mental processes are linear and sequential, the world in which we live is threefold. This quote by Bennett clearly explains the general meaning of the Enneagram. The symbol consists of a circle representing the law of unity, a sixth figure, a hexade representing the law of 7, and a triangle representing the law of 3. According to Keith Buzzell, the basic function of the first center is the sense of the outside world. Of the second center is the sense of self and the other, the inside world. And of the third center is the sense of I, the abstract world, the spontaneous directed behavior. I also find his study on the survival triads for each of the lower centers to be of excellent use in the self-awareness process of everyday life. So for the first center, that is the physical center, the survival triad is as follows. We have the defense or survival in the moment, which has to do with the instinctive subcenter, by deciding whether to fight or flight. We have survival by having food, which has to do with the moving subcenter. And we have the survival in the future by mating and reproducing. The plus represents the active force, the minus represents the passive receptive force, and the plus minus represents the reconciling force. The survival triad for the second center, that is the emotional center, is as follows. We have the defense or survival of the sense of self as a distinct being, which has to do with the uniqueness of the self. The sense of self in social and mating behaviors, the role that one has in groups. And of course the preservation of the group as a species. The survival triad for the third center, the intellectual center, has to do with the survival of the sense of I, the individuality. Survival of the knowledge, the patterns of observation like language, mathematics, art forms, physical skills. And survival of the individual creations into the future, like art, science, religion, and philosophy. Each of the brains has an underlying triadic form. The principal aspects of the form are shown in this image. So we will have the sensory, the motor, and the associative. For the first brain, these are images of the external world which derive from the senses of vision, hearing, taste, touch, smell, and balance. For the second brain, these are images, that is, resonant representations, of our inner world, extending from bodily sensations of hunger, fatigue, vitality, etc., to feelings of fear, anger, empathy, devotion. The third brain receives input from the first and second brains, as well as from its own associative process. The images formed by the third brain are abstract representations such as letters, words, numbers, and the sounds, colors, and textures that are substrates for the creative actions of the associative cortex of the third brain. In each brain, the images created within the sensory cortex are shared into the associative cortex. Here, they are blended together to form a flowing present moment representation of the world to which each of the brain opens, external, inner, or abstract. The primary function of each associative cortex is to evaluate the meaning or significance of the images presented to it and to determine a course of action, that is, a motion or manifestation of some kind. Memory plays an essential role in this process for all three brains. The motor cortex of each brain is the organizing center for the manifestation, which is typical for each brain. The first brain motor cortex organizes, along with the spinal cord, the patterns of musculoskeletal movement, walking, running, dancing, chopping wood, decided on by the associative cortex. The second brain motor cortex organizes a host of subtle expressions of the feeling states via the small muscles of the face, hands, and larynx, the voice box, operating with larger muscles of the trunk and extremities. We recognize these manifestations as facial expression, gesture, posture, and tone of voice. We experience the inner aspect of the second brain motor cortex functioning. We experience as the feelings, the emotions, that reflect state of our internal world. The third brain motor cortex organizes the internal and external expressions of the functioning of its associative cortex. These are what we call thoughts, ideas, symbolic representations, concepts, etc. All of this is built on the remarkable abstracting capacity that is characteristic of the third brain. The above description is compact and inevitably simplified. If we consider the triadic view of the human being, we can consider that, as per this triangle, the will is the will to live, that is the divine spark of life inside ourselves, which triangulates into three types of being inside of us: the intellectual being, the emotional being, and the physical being. And this, of course, has to do with our ternary nature and with the distinction between being and function. And having this idea, we can consider what we have spoken so far, that we can use the sensory, the motor, and the associative cortex as a substitute for the intellectual, physical, and emotional brain. So, of course, if we want to correlate the sensory, motor, and associative cortex with the three centers, the intellectual, emotional, physical, and their parts, and with the idea of higher and lower centers, this would be the correspondence. So we have started from a certain look at the human centers, the physical, the emotional, and the intellectual, their specific survival triads. And after that, we have seen how each of these centers, each of these brains, has an internal ternary structure of sensory, associative, and motor cortexes, and how this would relate to the higher and lower centers perspective. And we have came with this figure, which we'll use as an Enneagram in the following video, in order to speak more about the Kundabuffer and its effect on our daily behavior. And for more details about the books that we have published, and also about online programs dealing with theory, practical internal exercises, and Gurdjieff movements explained step by step, you can visit Gurdjieff Online. Or if you are interested only in the movements and sacred dances, you can visit the Gurdjieff Movements, and there you can find different series of complexity explained step by step. All my best.